Hello, everybody. It's the 27th of March, day 3 of me reading out The Reaper and the Scribe. Hope everybody is keeping safe, trying to find things to do, positive things to do with their time. Family of Hamtopia, send you all love and well wishes, health and positivity. Be safe and be happy. Let's get started. Chapter 4. Jamie and Alicia were the first to open their eyes, and what they saw made them both wince. The thing that stood out most was that the strange cloud formation had vanished, and the area was heavy with smoke and grime. In fact, it was hard to make out the balcony where they had just stood a moment before. Heavy machinery could be heard from the building behind them, and it was quite loud. Alicia was the first to notice the clothes she was wearing. "Oh, I look and smell horrible," she shrieked. "Be quiet. Don't draw attention to yourself. At least, not until I've worked out what's happened," insisted Jamie. "Okay, Mr. Know-It-All. You find out what is happening. I'm going to go get a bath and burn these rags that are polluting my body," cried Alicia. "Oh, Freddie is absolutely right about you. You are a brainless bimbo. Now be quiet while I think." "How dare you talk to me that way? I'm phoning my mother," she screamed. Jamie grasped his sister's head with both hands and pointed her face in the direction of her balcony. "Look, your apartment isn't there anymore. It's clearly a warehouse. Look around you, Alicia. Everything is different. It still leads, but not the leads we know. Just give me a minute or two to gather my thoughts, for God's sake. Do the world a favor, and for the next minute or two, keep your mouth shut." Alicia began to cry, and for the first time he could remember, Jamie actually felt sorry for her, feeling he went a little too far with his scolding. "Come on, sis. Don't cry. I don't know what's happened yet, but we'll work it out," he said, as the first real thought came through the shock of what had just happened as to where they might just be. Jamie had noticed the canal boats laden with coal. He saw the tall chimneys billowing black smoke into the sky. Most of all, he could hear the swishing and whooshing of steam engines. In the midst of all this, his brain was now telling him, no matter how outrageous it sounded, he and his sister were in the 19th century. On the other side of the canal, John's grip on Alice tightened as his eyes slowly opened. Nothing could have prepared John Watson for the sight that lay before him. "Are we dead and in heaven?" he thought. Alice opened her eyes, closely followed by her mouth, as she looked in awe upon the sights her brain couldn't even begin to understand. Both John and Alice looked around while still holding tightly to each other. Alice was the first to speak. Is this heaven, John?" "I was just thinking that. Let's go inside. I don't like it out here," replied John. They both let go of the guardrail around Alicia's balcony, turned and peered inside the apartment. They screamed simultaneously as they caught their reflections in a full-length mirror on the wall. "What am I wearing?" gasped Alice as she saw the Prada gown that adorned her body, and my hair and face. As she was wearing the latest hairstyle and makeup, "There's paint on my face. And look at you. Your hair, John, it's shining. And your clothes. We look like the Queen and her beloved Albert. Please tell me what's going on. I'm so scared, John. I want my ma'am," she sobbed. Now, I do know this. We aren't in heaven, because that was not a golden staircase. It was a scary, whirly wind with lightning in it. And I learned nothing in the Bible that said scary winds would carry you to heaven. Also, this can't be hell because it's just too nice. I wish our dad was here, 'cause he knows everything about everything," said John. "I can't see him knowing anything about this, John, because this is magic. Very soon a fairy princess is going to fly in here and demand to know who we are and why am I wearing her clothes," said Alice. "What do you know of fairy princesses?" scoffed John. "I know she won't take too kindly to wearing the fairy king's clothes, I can tell you that, my lad," announced his elder sister. "How could these clothes fit fairies? I'm thought of as a giant. I am 5'8.5" tall. I have to bend to get into some coal merchant's doors. Fairy clothes would not fit me," replied John. "Of course they'd fit you, silly man. They are magic fairy clothes," announced Alice. John just smiled at his sister, and somehow he knew their love would see them through this, whatever this was. After John and Alice's eyes adjusted to the blinding light of the new world they found themselves in, they let go of each other's hands. Alice tiptoed to the bedroom. She opened another door within it and looked inside. The sight that Alice gazed upon made her gasp. The array of dresses, tops, clothes of all description, and things she thought might be shoes, although she couldn't see any practical use for them, took her breath away. John looked out of the open glass doors and stepped through, back onto the balcony. It was difficult for his eyes to adjust to such bright light and to the sights on show in front of him. All of a sudden, he glimpsed something he knew. It was a factory, but it was clean, and all the windows had curtains. He could see people inside, sitting, eating, and drinking. Not one of them was working. There was no hustle and bustle outside. In fact, there was no coal, and no canal boats being loaded or unloaded. Everything looked shiny and new. He knew he was looking at Leeds, but he just couldn't understand what had happened to the only part of the great metropolis he had ever known. John Watson's mind didn't wander as easily as his sister's, so magic was out of the question. There had to be an answer to all this, he thought, but try as he might, he could not fathom any whatsoever. It was at this point 5 sharp beeps could be heard, and the whoosh of an elevator door sliding open made both siblings turn towards the sound. John and Alice grabbed each other again in fright, as an enormous giant of a man calmly stepped into the room. On the other side of the canal and the other side of Mother Nature's time rainbow, answers were coming, thick and fast, to Jamie. By looking at the skyline, or what he could make of it, he was narrowing down to a couple of decades either way the year he and his sister were in. He had, in fact, narrowed it down to between 1840 and 1870. This was because Leeds Bridge hadn't been rebuilt yet, and the rebuilding of the famous bridge that spans the River Aire began in 1870. On the other side of the canal was a warehouse built in 1840. Jamie's mind was racing, but then he caught a glimpse of his sister. Alicia was distraught. She was sitting on the floor with her bosom pressed against her thighs, her arms wrapped round the front of her legs, sobbing like a little girl. "Alicia, this isn't as bad as it seems. Quite simply, you were having a dream, or in your case, I should say a nightmare. For some reason, you have dragged me into it, or I am having a wonderful dream and have dragged you into mine. Either way, we will both wake up in the morning and everything will be back to normal." That should hold her for a while, he thought. "Do you really think so, Jamie?" asked Alicia. "Whoa," thought Jamie. "That's the first time she's called me that name in years. Yes, I do. Let's take a walk down the canal path and see what we can find," he said. Jamie didn't know why exactly, but he knew where he was going. As he passed a horse grazing upon clumps of grass on the towpath, he whispered, "Hello, Toby," in the horse's ear. As they approached the barge, Jamie realized he'd seen this boat before. It was an old print on his father's office wall. The name on the boat was different, with the word Watson instead of Winters, but it was definitely the same boat. He was starting to think this wasn't Alicia's nightmare at all. This was his own wonderful dream. Reality, however, soon hit home when a booming voice from the boat cried out, "Where have you two been? You told me you would be an hour, and by my watch you have been 2. Your mother has been beside herself with worry. Now let's have you in, and you can explain to me what happened," said an angry but relieved Albert Watson. If what had happened up until now was mind-blowing, to say the least, this was the icing on the cake. Although this was Alfred Watson from the 19th century, standing in front of James Albert Winters from the 21st century, Jamie was looking at his father. His looks, his voice, everything was the same. "What's happening?" screamed Alicia. "What's all this screaming about? What has happened to you, my girl?" shouted Doris as she took Alicia by the shoulders and shook her briskly. "Alice! Alice! Pull yourself together," she continued. Alicia could not understand in any way what was going on. Why was her mother dressed in rags? Why were she and her father on this ridiculous little boat? "What's happening?" she screamed again. At this point, Doris slapped her across the face, and Alicia fainted into Jamie's arms. At the other end of this time rainbow, a very scared John Watson looked up at this towering giant of a man that by now had walked over to them. Standing in front of his sister, he stuttered with a trembling voice, "You will not get my sister, giant. You may be bigger than me, but I will protect her with my life." The giant sat down on one of the sofas and calmly said, "Your sister is quite safe, as are you. Come and sit down. I have something to tell you both." Gingerly, John and Alice both sat down, although they never let go of each other's tight grip. With a smile on his face, the giant started to speak. "How am I going to begin this?" he said with a chuckle. "It's time for introductions. My name is Freddie Chambers, and I know that you two lovely people are John and Alice Watson. And one thing is for certain, I am not a giant. I am only 6 foot 5 inches tall. In my time, many people are this size, and some are taller than I." "So you're not going to eat us for your tea?" said Alice in a quivering voice. "No, I am not," said Freddie with a chuckle in his. "Could you tell us what has happened and why we are here?" inquired John. "There isn't an easy answer to that question, my friend. And you are not here because of something that you have done. You are good people, and when you go back, you probably won't remember any of this. You have swapped places with another brother and sister, and that sister is definitely not as nice as you are, Alice," said Freddie. "You say, when we go back. Could you tell us when that will be, sir?" asked John. "For you guys, not too long at all. For one of the other two, it will seem endless," replied Freddie. "They are both going to live your lives for a week. For your counterpart, John, it'll be a dream. But for yours, Alicia, it will be a nightmare." "I don't understand counterpart, sir," said John. "Oh, I'm sorry, John. My friend Jamie has taken your place back in your time, and his horrible excuse for a sister has taken its place as your dear sister," explained Freddie. "But won't our Mom and Dad worry where we are?" asked John anxiously. "Now, this is where it gets really complicated. I mean, really hard to understand. All of this will seem like only an hour has gone by to them. So everything will be the same when you return," said Freddie. "I wish I was back already," said Alice. "When you said back in your time, does that mean we are now in a time to come that's after ours?" asked John Watson. "Yes, John. It's called the future. But please don't question me about it, because we all know what trouble Marty McFly got into over it." "Marty McFly?" was John's answer. "That's exactly what I mean. You don't know about these things, so how can I tell you?" answered Freddie, seemingly digging himself into a hole. "If you tell us, then we will understand," said Alice. "Yes, but if I were to tell you how something evolved from your time, the obvious things being steam engines, or in your case, canal boats, you might go back and reinvent them before they were invented. And what would that do to the space-time continuum? It's just too frightening to think of," replied Freddie, whose hole was getting deeper by the second. "You know about steam engines? I want to learn about them. You must tell me all you know." "And what of lamps without candles?" said a now very excited John Watson. "Whoa, let's stop right there," said Freddie. This is exactly what I am talking about. You cannot find out about these things from me. I'm only here to see that you stay safe whilst you are here," he continued. John Watson got up and stared out of the window onto a brave new world and said, "The answers to all of my questions are out there, and I have to stay in here knowing that? Surely, sir, if you only knew how much I've longed for these kinds of answers, you would impart to me some small amount of knowledge, even if it was only up to when I came from." Freddie sat back and scratching his chin, he said, "I will check on my history. What date was it when you were last there?" "It's my birthday," said Alice, smiling again. "Many happy returns of the day, Alice," said Freddie. "What does that mean?" asked Alice. "It's just my silly way of saying I'm glad that it's your birthday." "So, what year is it?" "It's 1849, answered John. "I will see what I can do, but only up to 1849. Now, I bet you two are hungry. What do you like to eat?" asked Freddie, desperately trying to change the subject. Back on the coal barge, Alicia had come round from her faint. "I'm still here on this horrible boat," she cried. "Alicia, your faints are not going to work here," said Jamie as he looked down at the tear-stained face of his sister. "Remember, it's just a dream. We have to do as we are told here. You can't just dismiss what people who know more than you tell you and just do whatever you decide to do in this day and age. It's only for a short time. Then you can go back to being a dumb, worthless bimbo with your sickening friends." Remembering it was just a dream made her calm down, just as Doris said, "Now you are back in the land of the living? Can you get those pots washed?" "And who do you think you are, telling me to do a servant's task?" Doris raised her hand to smack Alicia across the face, but the slap was stopped by Albert, who said, "Don't rile yourself over this one, Doris. I will see to her." Now, Alicia was scared of no one, but she was pleased Albert had stopped his crazy wife from hitting her. It was plain to see now that these unwashed people were not her parents, and this nightmare was getting worse. Do you think I stopped Doris to save you a beating? Because if you do, you are very much mistaken, my girl. "Just shut up, you stupid old man, while I gather my thoughts together," said Alicia as her normal state of being began to kick in. Jamie saw Albert's facial expression and quickly said to Alicia, "Remember what I said, Alicia. The ways of dealing with people like you are quite different here." "And I have heard quite enough from you, so you shut your stupid mouth as well." Jamie smiled and said, "You are a bigger fool than I thought. I will leave you to it, Albert. I'm going topside to see what Doris is doing." "Okay, lad, this won't take long," was Albert's ominous answer. Alicia turned to Albert to set him straight, but the furious look upon his face stopped her in her tracks. What are you doing?" "Get away from me!" screamed Alicia. Albert now had hold of Alicia by the arm. He drew his arm back and brought his hand down hard across the back of Alicia's legs. The loudest slapping sound, followed by screams, could be heard emanating from the cabin. Jamie looked at Doris and she said, "She will be all right. She just needs working on, and my Albert is the man for the job." Jamie couldn't help hoping that whatever part of her anatomy Albert was slapping was hurting her. Albert let go of her arm, and the sobbing socialite stood, aghast at what had just transpired. "You cannot hit me. That is abuse, and I will have you arrested. I hate you. I feel degraded now that you have placed your hands on me." "Have you finished?" said Albert. "Oh, I am only just starting. I will see you." Alicia stopped talking when she saw Albert removing his very wide leather belt. "What are you doing?" she continued. "If my little slap didn't convince you to do the washing up, maybe I should put you over my knee and give your ass a tanning," said Albert. Begrudgingly, Alicia made her way to the large bowl with the tea-time pots and pans in it. "This water is freezing cold," she screamed. "Do what you always do. Put water in it from the kettle, you stupid girl," said Doris as she returned to the cabin with Jamie, who she looked at, giving him a wink. At first, Jamie looked puzzled. Looking over at Albert, he noticed he wore a smile on his face, too. "Come upstairs, lad. I've got some news for thee," said Albert with a grin. Both men went on deck, and Albert lit his tobacco. A plume of thick gray smoke filled the air as he sucked on his favorite pipe. In the cabin, Doris noticed Alicia's nails and said, "What has happened to your fingernails, my girl? Put your hands on my cutting board." "And precisely what do you think you're going to do?" screamed Alicia. "I will show you, my girl," said Doris, as she retrieved a large knife from a drawer. "And you raise your voice to me one more time, young lady, I will slap you so hard your teeth will rattle," she continued. Doris Watson placed Alicia's hand on the cutting board so that the back of it faced downwards. Then she chopped off the jeweled, perfectly manicured tips from each nail. Alicia tried to struggle, but her thin 21st century frame was no match for the hard-working frame of Doris Watson, and very soon 400 pounds worth of nail extensions had been thrown into the fire. Once again, Alicia Winters fainted. Now, on the canal bank, Albert, through the pipe smoke, was talking to Jamie Winters. "So then, lad, what's this here future of yours like?" Jamie just stood there with his mouth open, not knowing what to say. Albert laughed and said, "It's all right, lad. Things are happening too fast around here for me to worry about what's going to happen when I'm dead and gone." But, how do you know?" stuttered Jamie. "I don't know, young man," said the truthful boatman. "I saw a strange cloud formation as John and Alice were leaving, and at the same time I heard a voice inside my head. It could be likened to a familiar family voice, but I can't remember who. Something about their spoiled family. Well, I don't know how you can spoil a family or what that even means. Then came a different voice, a gentle, aging woman's voice, predicting your arrival. She said that my kids would be perfectly safe, and that you and your strange sister would be coming here for a week. That sister of yours isn't used to hard work, is she?" continued Albert, taking another drag on his pipe. Jamie was grateful for this turn of events and said, I'm sure that your children will be safe. I don't know what is happening. I have a feeling my sister is getting brought down to earth. Do you mind if I go and search out an engineering factory? You're just like my own son, John. His head is full of all this new nonsense. Yes, you can set off in the morning, but be back here within a week, or you will be stuck here. If that happens, I might not get my John back, said Albert as they returned to the boat. I will be back each night, and I promise I will be no trouble to you, said Jamie, with a broad smile on his face. When both men returned, Alicia was just coming around from her faint. When she saw her brother, she shouted, Will you take a look at the way she has butchered my nails? She lifted up both her hands in disgust. Your nails would have gotten in the way of your work, how you had them. Just think how much it would have cost you to get them cut. Doris has just saved you a few $100, Jamie quipped. Work? Screamed Alicia. Yes, said Albert. Work. You had better get an early night, because you will be up at 5 a.m, he continued. 5? Alicia screamed again. She doesn't use a lot of words, does she? Asked Albert, looking at Jamie. You're using words she doesn't understand, replied Jamie. Alicia stamped her foot hard on the boat floor and demanded to be shown to her room. You're standing in it, replied Doris. Where is everyone else sleeping? Inquired Alicia. Same place? Where else, silly girl? Retorted Doris. I am not sleeping in the same room as you people, said a defiant Alicia. Now I have had enough. Any more of this, and you are going over my knee, girl, boomed Albert. You just try it, and I'll have you arrested, she screamed. That's it, my girl. With that, Albert grabbed hold of Alicia, sat himself down, and placed her over his knee. Don't you dare! She screamed again, as she felt her dress get pulled over her head, and then the first thunderous clap on her naked bottom of Albert's right hand. She felt the slap again and again until the cheeks of her bottom were red raw. Albert stood up and stood Alicia upright again. Tears were streaming down her bewildered face. She looked at Jamie in disbelief that he could allow such an atrocity to take place without lifting a finger to help. She felt scared and alone, but most of all, she felt desecrated. Chapter 5. Freddie Chambers scratched his head as he was checking again what had happened in British history up until the mid-19th century. The food thing was easy. It was all one-pot meals with very little meat for the barge workers, so maybe the odd rabbit now and again. That was useful to Freddie, that Jamie's history casework from university was in folders at his flat. After going through Jamie's notes, he realized why he'd been awarded an honors degree in the subject. Back at Alicia's penthouse, Alice and John had begun investigating their new surroundings. None of this is real, sis, said John. I know, John, but it's the first time I've ever been in a palace, replied Alice. Alice, it's the first time you've been in a building, laughed John. Look how big everything is here, said Alice, whose voice now had an edge of excitement about it for the first time since their strange arrival. Just then, Alice noticed a fruit bowl. It was in a part of the house that she couldn't understand. Biting into a crisp, golden, delicious apple, she said, I wonder what this room is for, John. Her brother joined her in the kitchen and said, I can't imagine what goes on in here. As far as the two siblings from the 19th century were concerned, they might have been standing on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Not one of the items in that room resembled anything from a kitchen that they had ever witnessed. The siblings' confusion was put to one side due to the arrival back of Freddie Chambers. As the elevator doors swished open, heralding his return, the Victorian siblings instantly held on to each other again in a scared embrace. You two are going to have to get used to that entrance while you're here, quipped Freddie. I'm going to have to use the stairs. So, you are still using stairs in this wonderful age you live in? Asked John. Yes, we still use stairs, mainly for fire escapes, bedrooms, that sort of thing, replied Freddie, instantly putting his hands over his mouth. Stop asking me questions like that, he continued. Freddie made his way into the kitchen. John took his sister by the shoulders. That's my way out of here and into this modern world. Just think what I could learn, sis. I could have a glimpse into the future. I will find these stairs and escape for an hour or two when Freddie leaves again, said a rather excited John. No, John, screamed Alice. John placed his hand over her mouth and whispered, Shh! I will be back before you know it. You are very safe here, and there is nothing to fear. Soon the wondrous smell of rabbit stew began wafting in from the strange room, filling the entire area with the smell of home. All thoughts of escape left John's mind for a moment as his empty stomach took over his power of thought. Go, sit at the table, shouted Freddie as he marched in from the kitchen with 2 steaming bowls of rabbit stew in his hands. How can you have that ready so fast? Inquired an excited Alice. Ah, the wonders of the micro... Whoa, this is impossible, exclaimed poor Freddie, failing at every opportunity to keep the future from his guests. More magic, exclaimed Alice. Freddie just shook his head and gave his wards their evening meal. The 2 siblings tucked into their food without a sound, just eager enthusiasm. When the meal was over, all 3 moved into the living room and began talking about the history of their wonderful country up to the late 1840s. John knew some of what Freddie was teaching him, and this impressed Freddie. John's interest and knowledge of the, by John's time, late Matthew Murray was surprising to Freddie. Like a lot of people, Freddie had the misunderstanding that Victorian meant mostly poverty, disease, and ignorance. John began telling Freddie about his father and how he got started on the canals. My father believes there can be no greater power than a horse. He doesn't realize that the new engines which are being built right here in South Leeds have the power of many horses. My friend has seen one in action, and he said it was the best and most frightening thing he had ever seen. I want to go work on the railways. I want to be an engineer. Don't be silly, John. You have to stay and work the barge, laughed Alice. I know, John replied, with a faraway look in his eyes. You can be whatever you want to be, but maybe instead of working on the railways, why not aim to become an engineer like Brunel or Murray and actually design the locomotives, not just drive them, replied Freddie. Is that the modern way of thinking, Mr. Chambers? Because that is far from the truth in my day. Only money gets you an education where we are from, and we don't have any. My life is on the canal, and engineering is for my private thoughts, explained John. Freddie instantly thought of Alicia and how money had indeed gotten her everything she had wanted. He had always hated Alicia, but after hearing John lament upon something he could never be, his hatred of that spoilt bitch grew to epic proportions. He hoped she was getting what she deserved in the 19th century, and he hoped it was hurting her.